What if the greatest journey you'll ever take isn't across oceans, but through yourself? Imagine this for a moment. You've been away from home for 20 years. 20 birthdays have passed, 20 winters, 20 springs. The child you kissed goodbye is now a grown man. The wife you promised to return to no longer knows whether you're alive or dead. Your home has become a memory. Would you still keep going? Or would you finally give up? This is the question at the heart of one of the oldest stories ever told. A story so powerful that nearly 3,000 years later, people across the world still read it, study it, and find pieces of themselves within it. That story is the Odyssey. Written by the ancient Greek poet Homer, the Odyssey is often described as an epic adventure, and it certainly is. There are sea monsters, cyclopes, enchantresses, gods who interfere in human lives, storms that seem almost alive, islands where time feels suspended, yet beneath all of those extraordinary adventures lies a deeply human story. It's the story of longing, of perseverance, of temptation, of identity, and perhaps above all, it's the story of home. But before we meet the man at the center of this tale, we need to travel back to a world very different from our own. A world where every mountain seemed to hide a god, where the sea was both a highway and a graveyard, where courage was admired above comfort, and where stories were not simply entertainment. They were lessons passed from one generation to the next. This was ancient Greece. There were no airplanes, no maps that could guarantee a safe route, no weather forecasts. The sea was unpredictable. A calm morning could become a deadly storm before sunset. To sail across it required more than skill. It required faith, because every voyage carried the possibility that you might never return. Perhaps that's why the Greeks loved stories about journeys. Every voyage mirrored life itself. You leave the familiar, you face the unknown, you change, and if you're fortunate, you return home wiser than when you left. No hero embodied that journey more completely than a man named Odysseus. If you've imagined him as the strongest warrior in Greece, you might be surprised. He wasn't. If you've imagined him as the bravest, others might challenge that too. Odysseus's greatest strength wasn't his sword, it was his mind. He solved problems that strength alone never could. When others rushed forward, he paused to think. When others looked for power, he looked for possibilities. Today, we might call him strategic, but even the wisest person has flaws. And those flaws would shape everything that followed. To understand why Odysseus spent 20 years trying to return home, we must begin with another story. The story of a city called Troy. For 10 long years, Greek armies surrounded the great city. Its walls were too strong to break, its defenders too determined to surrender. Battle after battle ended without victory. The war seemed endless. Then Odysseus proposed an idea so unusual that many doubted it. Instead of attacking the city, they would appear to leave. On the beach, they would abandon a giant wooden horse hidden inside it. Greek soldiers would wait. The Trojans believed the horse was a gift, a symbol that the war had finally ended. Against the warnings of a few cautious voices, they pulled it inside their walls. That night, while the city celebrated, the hidden soldiers emerged. They opened the gates. The Greek army returned, and Troy fell. History has remembered this simply as the Trojan horse. But beneath the clever strategy lies an important lesson. Sometimes intelligence succeeds where force cannot. It's a lesson that echoes throughout the Odyssey. Again and again, Odysseus survives not because he is the strongest man in the room, but because he learns to think before he acts. Yet victory often carries its own dangers. After Troy fell, every surviving Greek warrior dreamed of the same thing: home. Some imagined seeing their families again. Others pictured quiet farms after years of war. Some simply wanted peace. Odysseus wanted the same. His kingdom was a small island called Ithaca. His wife, Penelope, had waited faithfully throughout the war. His young son, Telemachus, barely remembered his father. The journey should have taken only weeks. Instead, it lasted another 10 years. Why? Because victory in war did not mean victory over pride. And that is where our story truly begins. The Greeks believed the gods watched everything. Whether or not we share that belief today, the gods in Homer's world represent something timeless. They remind us that our choices have consequences, that arrogance often invites disaster, and that no one, however clever, is beyond the reach of fate. One god in particular would shape Odysseus' destiny. Poseidon, the ruler of the sea, powerful, unpredictable, relentless. His anger would transform an ordinary voyage into one of history's greatest adventures. Storms scattered Odysseus' fleet across unknown waters. Ships disappeared beneath towering waves. Companions were lost. Each island promised hope, and often delivered another trial instead. Imagine standing at the edge of an endless ocean. Every direction looks the same. No landmarks, no certainty, only water stretching beyond the horizon. How would you know where to go? More importantly, how would you keep hope alive? This is where the Odyssey becomes more than an ancient tale, because every one of us eventually finds ourselves on a journey we never planned. Perhaps it's losing a job you believed would last forever. Perhaps it's moving to a new city where no one knows your name. Perhaps it's caring for someone you love through illness. Perhaps it's grieving someone who never comes home. Life has a way of changing our maps without asking permission. And in those moments, we all become travelers. The names are different, the centuries have changed, but the feeling is the same. We search for solid ground. We wonder whether we'll ever feel like ourselves again. Odysseus understood that feeling. Every storm pushed him farther from the life he wanted. Every setback tempted him to believe that home was slipping beyond reach. Yet something remarkable kept him moving, not certainty. Hope. Hope is a curious thing. It doesn't promise that tomorrow will be easy. It simply whispers that tomorrow is worth reaching. That quiet hope carried Odysseus across seas, filled with uncertainty. But hope alone was not enough, because before he could return home, he would first have to confront something much larger than monsters. He would have to confront himself. Life has an interesting way of doing this. Just when we think we've reached the end of one struggle, another quietly begins. Odysseus and his men sailed across unfamiliar waters, searching for the shortest route back to Ithaca. No maps could guide them. No lighthouse pointed the way, only the wind, and whatever fate waited beyond the horizon. Eventually, they arrived at an island unlike any they'd seen before. The shoreline was peaceful, the fields were green, the air was calm. Nothing suggested danger. Sometimes, the greatest dangers never announce themselves. Odysseus sent a small group of men to explore. The island was inhabited by a mysterious people known as the Lotus Eaters. They welcomed the strangers warmly. There were no weapons, no threats, only food. Among the food was a sweet fruit called the lotus. The sailors accepted it gladly. Moments later, something remarkable happened. They no longer cared about going home. Their memories faded. Their longing disappeared. Their purpose quietly dissolved. They didn't become prisoners. They simply stopped wanting to leave. Imagine that. not because chains held them, because comfort did. Odysseus was horrified. He forced his own men back onto the ships, even as they begged to remain. At first glance, this episode seems strange. Why would anyone willingly abandon their family? But perhaps Homer wasn't talking about a magical fruit at all. Perhaps he was talking about something every generation eventually encounters: comfort, distraction, the slow forgetting of what truly matters. Today, very few of us will ever taste the lotus, but perhaps we encounter it in other forms. An endless stream of videos that quietly steals an entire evening. The habit of postponing important conversations because tomorrow always feels easier. The comfortable routine that slowly replaces the dreams we once promised ourselves. None of these things seem dangerous. In fact, they often feel pleasant. That is precisely why they are so powerful. The Lotus Eaters remind us that not every obstacle appears frightening. Some arrive smiling. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that our life becomes what our thoughts repeatedly dwell upon. Homer offers a similar warning through story instead of philosophy. Be careful what makes you forget your purpose. Because forgetting rarely happens all at once. It happens quietly, one comfortable day at a time. Odysseus understood that reaching home required more than survival. It required remembering where he was going. That lesson remains just as important today, because the greatest danger isn't always choosing the wrong path. Sometimes, it's forgetting you were ever on a journey. The sea carried them onward. Days later, another island appeared. This one looked empty. Wild goats wandered across the hills. Smoke rose from distant caves. The men hoped to find food and shelter. Instead, they found one of the most unforgettable creatures in all of mythology, the Cyclops. His name was Polyphemus, a giant, towering above ordinary men, with incredible strength but little compassion. Odysseus and his companions entered the giant's cave while he was away. Inside, they discovered cheese, milk, food. Some of the sailors pleaded, "Let's take what we need and leave." It was the sensible choice, but Odysseus wanted something else. He wanted to meet the cave's owner. He wanted to see this strange creature for himself. Curiosity is one of humanity's greatest gifts. It has led us across oceans, to the moon, into the deepest parts of science. But curiosity without wisdom can also become recklessness. When the Cyclops returned, he sealed the cave with an enormous stone. Then he did something horrifying. He captured the men, and one by one began eating them. It is one of the darkest moments in the entire epic, not because Homer wanted to shock his audience, but because he wanted us to understand the cost of one careless decision. Odysseus quickly realized that brute strength would accomplish nothing. Even if they killed the giant, they couldn't move the massive stone blocking the entrance. Once again, his greatest weapon became his mind. He offered the Cyclops strong wine. The giant drank deeply. Soon, he collapsed into a heavy sleep. Before losing consciousness, Polyphemus asked, "What is your name?" Odysseus answered with one of the most famous replies in literature. "My name is Nobody." When the giant finally slept, the Greeks sharpened a wooden stake. Together, they drove it into his single eye. The Cyclops awoke screaming. Other giants rushed outside his cave. "What happened?" they shouted. "Who is hurting you?" The blinded Cyclops cried, "Nobody." The other giants looked at one another in confusion. "If nobody is attacking you," they answered, "then perhaps the gods are punishing you." And they walked away. It was brilliant. A perfect example of intelligence overcoming impossible odds. But the story doesn't end there, and this is where everything changes. As Odysseus' ship sailed safely away, his pride began to grow. He could not bear the thought that the Cyclops would never know who had defeated him. Against the desperate warnings of his crew, Odysseus stood upon the deck and shouted across the sea, "It was not nobody who defeated you. It was Odysseus, king of Ithaca." For one brief moment, his pride felt victorious. Then the Cyclops smiled, because Polyphemus was no ordinary giant. He was the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea. Lifting an enormous boulder, the Cyclops hurled it toward the fleeing ship. The wave nearly pulled them back to shore. Then Polyphemus raised his hands toward the heavens and prayed, "Father, never allow Odysseus to return home, or if he must, let him arrive alone, having lost everything." From that moment onward, Poseidon became Odysseus's relentless enemy. One sentence, one boast, one moment of pride, and the journey home became 10 years longer. Think about that. Odysseus had escaped the monster, but he could not escape himself. How often does this happen in our own lives? We win the argument and damage the relationship. We achieve success and become arrogant. We receive praise and stop listening. Sometimes our greatest setbacks don't come from our enemies. They come from the parts of ourselves we refuse to control. The Cyclops wasn't the final lesson. Pride was. That is why this episode has survived for nearly 3,000 years. It isn't really about giants. It's about us. After many more days at sea, the exhausted crew reached another island. This time they were greeted not by a monster, but by a woman. Her name was Circe. She lived alone in a beautiful palace, surrounded by forests and wild animals. She welcomed the sailors with warmth, prepared a magnificent feast, smiled kindly. The men relaxed. For the first time in many weeks, they felt safe. Then, with a single touch of magic, Circe transformed them into pigs. The image is unforgettable. Strong warriors reduced to animals. At first it feels like fantasy, but perhaps Homer was asking another question. What happens when people stop living with purpose? How easily do we become driven only by comfort, appetite, and habit? Animals don't ask, "What kind of person should I become?" They simply follow instinct. Humans have a choice. Circe's island becomes a symbol of what happens when we stop making conscious choices. When we drift, when we settle, when we allow comfort to replace growth. With the help of the god Hermes, Odysseus resisted Circe's magic. Instead of becoming another prisoner, he confronted her. To his surprise, Circe changed. She restored his companions. She welcomed them as honored guests. Weeks became months. Months became a year. There was good food, warm beds, music, laughter, no battles, no storms, no danger. Many people would have called it paradise. Yet Odysseus slowly realized something unsettling. Comfort had become another prison, not because Circe was cruel, because he had stopped moving toward the life he truly wanted. How many times have we done the same? Remaining in a job we no longer love because change feels uncertain. Delaying an important dream because today feels comfortable enough. Choosing familiarity over growth. The lesson isn't that comfort is bad, far from it. Rest matters, peace matters. But there is a difference between resting and forgetting to continue your journey. One restores you. The other quietly keeps you from becoming who you were meant to be. Eventually, Odysseus gathered his companions. They thanked Circe, returned to their ships, and sailed once more into the unknown. Because deep inside, he understood something that every meaningful journey eventually teaches. Home is not reached by accident. It is reached by choosing, again and again, to keep moving forward, even when the easier choice is to stay exactly where you are. By now, Odysseus had learned something that many people spend a lifetime discovering. The greatest dangers in life are rarely the ones we expect. Sometimes they appear as monsters, sometimes as comfort, sometimes as pride. But the journey was far from over. In fact, its hardest lessons were still waiting. The sea stretched endlessly before them. Days blended into weeks. The wind became their only companion. Then, on the horizon, another island slowly emerged from the morning mist. It looked peaceful, beautiful, almost inviting. Yet Odysseus knew that appearances could no longer be trusted. Every place he had visited had offered a different lesson. Every mistake had demanded a different price. This time, the challenge would not test his strength. It would test his attention. Long before sailors reached this part of the sea, stories had already spread about strange voices drifting across the waves. They belonged to creatures known as the sirens. Their songs were said to be so beautiful, so irresistible, that anyone who heard them would abandon everything else. Ships would turn toward the music. Captains would forget their destination. Sailors would leap into the sea. None ever returned. Notice something interesting. The sirens did not attack ships. They didn't throw spears. They didn't create storms. They simply offered something people desperately wanted: a beautiful distraction. Before reaching the island, the enchantress Circe had warned Odysseus about them. "You cannot stop the song," she told him, "but you can prepare yourself before you hear it." That advice would save his life. Odysseus ordered his crew to melt beeswax and press it into their ears. None of them would hear the music, but Odysseus himself wanted to listen. He wanted to understand the temptation without surrendering to it. So he gave his men one final command: "Tie me tightly to the mast of the ship. No matter what I say, do not untie me." The sailors obeyed. Soon the song began. At first it sounded distant, like a gentle breeze. Then it became clearer, warmer, more beautiful than anything Odysseus had ever heard. The voices promised knowledge, glory, peace. They promised answers to every question he had ever asked. His heart raced. He struggled against the ropes. He shouted, begged, ordered his men to release him, but they could not hear him. The wax protected them. The ropes protected him. Only when the ship had sailed safely beyond the island did the song finally fade. The crew removed the wax, untied their captain, and continued their journey. It is one of the most unforgettable scenes in all of literature. But perhaps the sirens never represented mythical creatures at all. Perhaps they represent every distraction that promises happiness, while quietly pulling us away from what truly matters. Today, the songs sound different. The endless pursuit of status, the pressure to compare our lives with everyone else's, the temptation to chase approval instead of purpose, the belief that just one more achievement, one more purchase, one more promotion will finally make us feel complete. The songs change. Human nature does not. What makes Odysseus remarkable is not that he was immune to temptation. He wasn't. He expected to be tempted. So he built systems before temptation arrived. He didn't trust willpower alone. He trusted preparation. How many problems in life could be avoided if we prepared ourselves before emotions took over? The sirens teach us that wisdom is not pretending temptation doesn't exist. Wisdom is creating habits that keep us moving in the right direction, even when temptation feels irresistible. After escaping the sirens, another danger waited. This time, there was no perfect solution, only two terrible options. On one side of a narrow strait lurked Scylla, a terrifying sea creature with 6 long necks. Each head could seize a sailor from the deck of a passing ship. On the opposite side churned Charybdis, a gigantic whirlpool capable of swallowing an entire vessel before spitting it back into the sea. Sail too close to Scylla, and some men would die. Sail too close to Charybdis, and everyone would die. Odysseus faced a decision every leader eventually encounters. Not, what is the perfect choice, but what is the least harmful one? This is one of the first stories in history to acknowledge something deeply uncomfortable. Sometimes life offers no ideal answer. Sometimes every path involves sacrifice. Every parent understands this. Every doctor, every business owner, every leader. There are moments when waiting only makes the situation worse, when perfection becomes the enemy of action. Odysseus chose to sail closer to Scylla. 6 of his companions were taken. It was heartbreaking. He could hear their cries as the ship sailed beyond reach. He carried that memory for the rest of his life. The lesson is painful. Leadership is not the absence of difficult decisions. It is the willingness to carry their weight. Some choices leave scars, no matter how wisely they are made. And yet, refusing to choose is still a choice. Not long afterward, Odysseus received another extraordinary instruction. If he truly wished to find his way home, he must first travel somewhere no living person wished to go, the land of the dead. It sounds impossible. Yet symbolically, it may be one of the most important moments in the entire epic. Every meaningful journey eventually requires us to confront what we fear most. For Odysseus, that meant walking among memories, among regrets, among those who had lived before him. There, he met the spirit of his mother. She had died while he was away at war. Imagine carrying hope in your heart for 20 years, only to discover that someone you loved never lived to see your return. Odysseus reached out to embrace her. His arms passed through empty air. 3 times he tried. 3 times he failed. Some losses cannot be undone. Some conversations can never happen. Some embraces arrive too late. It is one of the most human moments in the entire poem, not because of magic, but because of grief. Nearly every person who has lived long enough understands that feeling. The wish for one more conversation, one more meal, one more ordinary afternoon with someone who is no longer here. The underworld teaches Odysseus something no battle ever could. Life is precious precisely because it ends. Every sunrise, every shared laugh, every goodbye, every ordinary day. Its value comes from the fact that it cannot last forever. Perhaps that is why we should spend less time rushing through life and more time noticing it. Eventually, after countless hardships, Odysseus arrived on yet another island. This one belonged to the nymph Calypso. Unlike the monsters before her, Calypso offered no violence. She offered paradise. She loved Odysseus. She promised him comfort, safety, even immortality. Imagine hearing those words after years of suffering. You never have to struggle again. You never have to grow old. You never have to fear death. Many people would accept immediately. Odysseus did not. Every evening, Homer tells us, he walked to the shore. He looked across the endless sea, and he wept. Not because Calypso treated him poorly, she cared for him. Not because the island lacked beauty, it was magnificent. He cried because comfort is not the same as belonging. He did not miss a palace. He missed home. He missed Penelope. He missed the rocky shores of Ithaca. He missed the ordinary life that had once seemed so ordinary. How often do we discover the value of something only after we've been separated from it? Health, family, friendship, time, home. Calypso's island asks a quiet question. What is success if it costs you the people who give your life meaning? That question feels just as relevant today. Many people spend years chasing careers, recognition, or wealth. There's nothing wrong with ambition. But the Odyssey gently reminds us that achievement without connection can become another kind of exile. At last, after 20 years of absence, the outline of Ithaca appeared on the horizon. Imagine seeing your home after believing you might never return. The mountains looked the same. The sea smelled familiar. The wind carried memories instead of uncertainty. But something had changed. Not the island. Odysseus. He had left as a celebrated warrior. He returned as a wiser man, stronger not because of the battles he had won, but because of the person those battles had shaped. And perhaps that is the hidden meaning of the entire journey. The purpose was never simply to return home. The purpose was to become someone worthy of it. The storms had stripped away his arrogance. The monsters had revealed his weaknesses. The years had taught him patience. Loss had taught him gratitude. Temptation had taught him discipline. Every hardship had become another teacher. By the time his feet touched the shores of Ithaca, he was no longer the man who had sailed away 20 years before. He was finally ready for the last and greatest challenge, not defeating monsters, not surviving storms, but proving that wisdom, patience, and love are stronger than anger and revenge. And that final lesson would become the true ending of the Odyssey. After 20 years, Odysseus finally stood on the shores of Ithaca. The journey that had taken him across impossible seas was almost complete. But strangely, the hardest part was not crossing oceans. It was walking back into the life he had left behind. Because returning home is not always as simple as arriving at a familiar place. Sometimes the place has changed. Sometimes the people have changed. And sometimes the person returning is no longer the person who left. This is one of the deepest truths hidden inside the Odyssey. The journey home is not only about distance, it is about transformation. When Odysseus left Ithaca, he was a warrior, a brilliant strategist, a man admired for his intelligence. But he was also proud. He believed he could outsmart any challenge. And perhaps that confidence was part of his strength, but it was also his weakness. The Cyclops taught him humility. The Sirens taught him discipline. The Lotus Eaters taught him the danger of forgetting his purpose. Calypso taught him the difference between comfort and belonging. The sea itself became a teacher, and every lesson changed him. Now, standing on the shores of Ithaca, Odysseus was not simply returning to his kingdom. He was returning as a different man. But there was a problem. His home was no longer waiting peacefully for him. During his absence, rumors had spread. Many believed Odysseus was dead, and without a king, Ithaca had become vulnerable. A group of wealthy men called the Suitors had entered his palace. They surrounded Penelope, Odysseus's wife. They demanded that she choose a new husband. They consumed the resources of the kingdom. They acted as though the house belonged to them. But Penelope refused. For years, she waited. Not because she knew Odysseus would definitely return. She waited because she remained loyal to the promise they had made. This is one of the most remarkable parts of the story, because while Odysseus's journey is filled with battles against monsters, Penelope fights a different kind of battle, a quiet one, a battle of patience, intelligence, and endurance. She doesn't fight with a sword, she fights with wisdom. The suitors pressure her constantly. They tell her that waiting is pointless. They tell her Odysseus is gone. They tell her she must accept reality. But Penelope refuses to surrender. She creates a clever plan. She tells them she will choose a new husband after completing a special task. Every day, she works on weaving a burial cloth. Every night, she secretly undoes the work she completed during the day. For years, she delays them. The suitors believe they are forcing her to move forward, but she quietly controls the situation. This reveals one of the most beautiful ideas in the Odyssey. Strength does not always look like power. Sometimes strength looks like patience. Sometimes courage is simply refusing to give up what matters. When Odysseus finally arrives in Ithaca, he does not immediately reveal himself. This is important. The old Odysseus might have rushed into the palace. He might have demanded recognition. He might have allowed anger to control him. But the man who returns is wiser. He observes. He waits. He creates a plan. The journey has changed him. The hero who left Ithaca relied on cleverness. The hero who returns understands restraint. That may be the greatest victory of all, not defeating enemies, but mastering himself. Eventually, the moment arrives. A contest is announced. Penelope declares that she will marry the man who can perform a task only Odysseus could complete. They bring out his old bow, a weapon so powerful that none of the suitors can even bend it. One by one, they fail. They struggle. They become frustrated. The weapon that once belonged to Odysseus remains a symbol of something they cannot understand. Strength is not just physical power. It comes from character. Then, disguised as a beggar, Odysseus steps forward. The suitors laugh. They mock him. They underestimate him. But he calmly takes the bow. He holds it, strings it, and completes the challenge effortlessly. In that moment, the disguise falls away. The king has returned. The battle that follows is fierce. Odysseus and his allies reclaim the palace. The suitors are defeated. The kingdom is restored. But the true emotional climax of the Odyssey is not the battle. It is the reunion, the moment between Odysseus and Penelope. After 20 years apart, after years of uncertainty, after believing they might never see each other again, they finally stand together. Yet even here, Homer does something surprising. Penelope does not immediately run into his arms. She tests him. She wants to know whether this man truly is her husband. She orders that their marriage bed be moved. Odysseus immediately reacts. Impossible. The bed cannot be moved. Because he built it himself around the trunk of a living olive tree. Only he and Penelope know this secret. In that moment, she knows. This is truly Odysseus, not because of his appearance, not because of his words, but because they share a history no stranger could know. And perhaps this is the deepest meaning of home. Home is not simply a location. It is a collection of memories, promises, experiences, people who know who you were and who you have become. Odysseus crossed oceans searching for a place, but what he truly wanted was connection, to be known, to belong, to return to the people who gave meaning to his life. So why does the Odyssey still matter after almost 3,000 years? Why do we still tell this story? Because every generation understands the feeling of being lost, not necessarily lost at sea, but lost in life. We all experience moments when the path ahead is unclear, when we wonder whether we're moving in the right direction, when we face challenges we never expected. And like Odysseus, we all encounter our own versions of the mythical world. The Lotus Eaters remind us not to forget our purpose. The Cyclops reminds us to control our pride. The Sirens remind us to protect ourselves from distractions. Scylla and Charybdis remind us that some choices will never be perfect. Calypso reminds us that comfort is not always the same as fulfillment. And Ithaca reminds us that what we search for is often closer than we realize. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Odyssey is this: a meaningful life is not one without storms. It is one where we continue sailing despite them. Odysseus didn't become heroic because he avoided suffering. He became heroic because suffering transformed him. Every challenge removed something unnecessary: his arrogance, his impatience, his illusions, until what remained was something stronger: wisdom. Think about your own journey. What storms have you faced? What experiences changed you? What things did you once think were disasters, but later realized were lessons? Maybe the difficult chapter of your life was not the end of your story. Maybe it was the part that prepared you for the next one, because journeys rarely make sense while we are living them. Only when we look back do we see the pattern, the wrong turns, the unexpected meetings, the painful moments. Somehow, they all shaped the person standing here today. Odysseus spent 20 years trying to return home. But perhaps he was not only searching for Ithaca, perhaps he was searching for himself, and maybe that is why this ancient story continues to live. Because underneath the monsters and gods, underneath the battles and storms, there is a simple human truth. We are all travelers. We are all searching for something, a place where we belong, a purpose that matters, a version of ourselves we can be proud of. And the journey toward that place may be the greatest adventure we ever experience. So perhaps the question is not, will we face storms? We will. The question is, who will we become when we reach the other side? Because in the end, the greatest journey is not the distance we travel. It is the person we become along the way. And that is the timeless wisdom of the Odyssey.